Finland was also within the Soviet sphere of interest, and it also received an ultimatum in September 1939. The conditions of the ultimatum were similar to those presented to the Baltics. But simultaneously, the Soviet government demanded some territory adjacent to Leningrad in exchange for other territories in more remote areas. The Soviet government said that the exchange of territories were necessary because Leningrad was very close to the border, so for its security it was necessary to get some more territory. But Finland refused. The Soviet Union created a Finnish Democratic Republic in parts of Karelia occupied by the Soviets. The head of the People's Government of Finland, which was put in place to govern the Finnish Democratic Republic, Otto Kuusinen, signed a treaty of friendship and mutual assistance between Finland and the USSR. But Soviet plans did not go smoothly in this case. The Finns organized fierce opposition. The Winter War, which lasted from November 1939 to March 1940, did not go well for the Soviet Union. You can see the Soviet troops, that is the lower picture on this slide, and you can see the top picture is Finnish troops. Immediately you can see that something was wrong with the Soviet troops. They did not have white cover on their uniform. They were very noticeable in the snow. The size of the armies was incomparable. Of course, the Soviet army was much bigger and stronger than the Finnish army. But by March, the Soviet army lost 130,000 killed or missing and 200,000 wounded. The Finns lost only 23,044 wounded. The Soviets suffered particularly from Finnish snipers, but also from the weather conditions for which they were not very well prepared. Here are the two Soviet soldiers frozen to death in their trench. The outcome of the war was still clear because the Soviet army increased the number of troops and equipment from day to day. But in March, Stalin decided to sue for peace. Why did he do that? The Soviet Union was expelled from the League of Nations, and France and England threatened to intervene into this war. So the Finns lost some of their territory, which actually the Soviets demanded in the first place. But they kept their independence. And also, the Finns left the territories. There were no Finnish population left in the territories occupied by the Soviet Union. 1940 was a bad year for the USSR. In September 1940, Japan, Italy, and Germany signed the Tripartite Pact. That meant that the Soviet Union was left out again, and it was threatened on two sides, both by Japan and by Germany. Here is the signing of the Tripartite Pact. Besides that, Germany started to get into the territory of Finland and Romania. It was particularly interested in Romania because of its oil. In November 1940, Hitler invited Molotov to Germany and offered the Soviet Union to join the Tripartite Pact. Stalin replied almost immediately. On 25th November, he sent his own conditions of joining the pact back to Germany. First of all, the first condition was Germans' withdrawal from Finland. Bulgaria was to be within Soviet sphere of influence, and later the USSR was to be allowed to have its bases near Turkish Straits. Stalin also envisaged the forfeiture by Japan of any claims to oil and coal concessions in North Sakhalin. And of course, it was assumed that the Soviet Union continued to supply Germany with resources. Hitler did not reply. By then, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia had already joined the Tripartite Pact. In March 1941, Bulgaria and Yugoslavia did too, but Yugoslavia in 2 days had a coup, and it left the pact. Hitler actually approved the invasion of the USSR in December 1940. The date was set for 15th May 1941. But the invasion was delayed because in April 1941, Germany had to occupy Greece to help its ally Italy, which attempted to occupy Greece in 1940 but did not quite manage. By June 1941, this was how the map of Europe looked. It was just before the German invasion of the Soviet Union. There is one more question to discuss before we get to that invasion. There is a widely spread opinion that Stalin was intending a preventive strike against Germany. He spoke of the need to train the army for attack, not for defense. In the last 2 years before the war, the Soviet army more than doubled its size. About 25,000 tanks were built. It had 18,000 fighter planes, 3 to 4 times more than Germany. In 1937, 1940, the number of officers increased by more than 2.5 times. But one should always take into consideration the fact that the quality of Soviet armaments was often poor. Of 25,000 tanks, only 15 were latest models. Only 1/4 of military aircraft was new. Figures were often overblown. There was also a shortage of well-trained military personnel, and even in peacetime, Soviet Union lost a lot of planes in accidents. New officers were inexperienced. But more important than that, the country was drained of resources. I showed this table to you once before when we spoke about collectivization, and then I drew your attention to 1930, 1932, 33 figures. Now I want to draw your attention to 1939, 1940 figures. You can see that compared to 1927, the production of grain did not grow in any way significantly. So by the beginning of the war, the sale of flour and bread in rural areas was banned. The queues and shortages returned. Milk, bread, meat, the quantity of any of these products was limited. Taxes and prices went up, salaries down. Working hours were lengthened. To be late became a crime. And then there were shortages of many things, such as electricity and metal production. So Stalin actually knew that the country was not ready for war. He did not believe, however, that Hitler would attack the USSR, despite the warnings, and they were multiple, including from Churchill. Hitler personally promised to Stalin that he would not attack the USSR. On my honor as head of state, I assure you, he wrote to Stalin, that Germany will not attack the Soviet Union.